Welcome to the Story of the Week. My name is Jay Kevin Payne, bringing you the supplemental podcast to the supplemental podcast that is produced by the Conversation Project. For this podcast, we're going to give you more detail into one of the stories we presented in the weekly wrap-up podcast, which is a wrap-up of the top 10 stories that you engaged in, giving us the full view of stories that we use to give our daily newscast, podcast, videocast, which is called Things You Might Not Have Heard. Yes, a lot to get into to basically tell you that I'm going to give you about 20 minutes or so of commentary on one story of the week. That's not necessarily the greatest story of them all, but it's the greatest story from the listing of stories you said were great this week. Now, we had some issues this week, some difficulties, as we spent half the week being banned from Twitter and Facebook. So some of the numbers that we'd have normally that we get in our responses don't quite exist because we spent a good chunk of this week, the week ending the 17th of June, 2023, not existing for the social medias. Now, how this actually does work when it works out well is we provide you the chance to tell us what stories are conversational, what stories are worth talking about for our weekday morning newscast. And we do that by putting stories on Facebook and Twitter. The feeds are on facebook.com/This Is a Conversation Project and twitter.com/th_conversation. We go to those websites and see what we post. Every 50 minutes, we post news stories from various sources, and you engage in them. We get a number of essentially what stories people are dealing with, obviously the engagement. And from that, we put them into a spreadsheet that weighs them out evenly and gives us a score from top to bottom. This week, we had 204 distinct different stories this week. And we're going to give you real quickly the top 10 stories and the one at the very bottom, just for context. And then we're going to present for you more detail into one of those stories that you deemed that were most conversational, with the caveat that this week we had a couple of big things that didn't get counted because of not being on the Twitter and Facebook, including the indictment of Donald Trump and the sentencing of the man in the synagogue killing. That case finally went to trial, and that was done. So those didn't even get any description because you couldn't see it for this week. But the stories we did have were some pretty big stories as well. Let's go through the top 10, and then we'll give you the almost relevant one just for some context. In order, number 1, shark attack in Egypt kills a Russian citizen. Number 2, Jamie Foxx's camp breaks their silence. Embattled actor's team declares it is completely inaccurate. He was hospitalized after COVID vaccination. Number 3, Jordan Vandersloot case. Natalie Holloway suspect pleads not guilty to extortion, wire fraud. And number 4, diabetes metformin might help prevent long COVID. Number 5, Robinhood to delist tokens for Solana, Cardano, and Polygon after SEC suits named them as securities. Number 6, ESPN director Kyle Brown dies after suffering medical emergency at NCAA Baseball Super Regional. Number 7, Jimmy Allen accused of secretly filming women during sex in second misconduct lawsuit. Number 8, man rigged home with Indiana Jones booby traps. Injured FBI agent. Always had trouble seeing booby traps. Jennifer Aniston, 54, reveals the ageist compliment she cannot stand. That's the number 9 story. And number 10, Sony sent updated version of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse to movie theaters after sound complaints. Just for context, a story that got basically no love this week had this headline, which was Sherry Shepard calls out local TV station in Texas for secretly filming her backstage with a spy camera. You can go deeper in detail for those stories by going to the sources where you found this story or going to our website specifically. This is theconversationproject.com and clicking on the link for the weekly wrap up. Those links for those stories and the full podcast explaining them are there. Now, let's explain what we're talking about today. What we do to pick the story that we talk about is we take those top 10 stories and we mix them up in an order that they're not in the same numerical order. And then we knock them off bracket style 2 by 2 to see which story will reign, which one will be supreme story. And that supreme story for this week happens to be the headline for number 2, which is read, Jamie Foxx's camp breaks their silence. Embattled actor's team declares it is completely inaccurate. He was hospitalized after COVID vaccination. So that's a long way to say we're going to talk about Jamie Foxx and his illness and the fact that they say is not the COVID vaccination. So let's get into that right now. We have been dealing with for weeks the fact that Jamie Foxx has been hospitalized. He was filming a movie, and it's a pretty big movie going on, pretty big details happening only to find that in the middle of filming, it's a lot like that commercial he had for the betting app, where all of a sudden he's there with the person and they're dying and going over, and then all of a sudden he gets a page that his bet came through and they're all cheering. Then we got to go back to the movie. It's a lot like that, where he's filming a movie and it's pretty critical, and he gets ill and he goes to the hospital, and we spend a few days not knowing what's going on. Technically, we've spent a few weeks at this point, a few months, not knowing what exactly is going on, as the illness has been listed as mystery for all the people to see in the actual public eye, all the actual reporting, if you will, to the actual sources. That does not keep the mainstream media from tapping into what the Black Twitter folks are talking about, and a lot of the conspiracy theory going on to what happened. So what we think that happened was he got sick on a film that was costing a lot of people a lot of money, so people were worried about it. What we think that really happened in this conspiracy sort of thought process is he got sick after having to take a COVID vaccination, after going obviously years without being vaccinated, but working in the process and doing all the protocols that were there. He just didn't want to be vaccinated. And his co-stars for this one, because they were big enough to basically suggest in a strong manner that he do it or he not get paid for this movie, had him get vaccinated. And so he got vaccinated. And then from that, he suffered this mystery illness, which is actually a stroke. Now, we got some of these details from people who should have been inside of Jamie Foxx's camp, like Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson was one of the biggest names to sort of spill the beans, if you will. But many people who have leaked ideas and leaked thought processes and leaked what's going on about his treatment have said that essentially Jamie Foxx had a stroke, and the stroke was triggered by something in the COVID vaccine. Now, this has been denied over and over again by his family, his friends, the folks that are in the Jamie Foxx's camp, as we got in the headline there. His daughter has been on various different platforms, social media, and actual real platforms, saying her dad did not have a stroke based off the COVID-19 vaccine. He had a medical issue and he's dealing with it. He's in rehab. He's getting better. He's going through all the rehabilitation to be back in his own self so he can be back to normal and hopefully get back to work fairly soon. But this is not coming back from the COVID-19. Meanwhile, many people on the fringe and many people in the right wing are hailing Jamie Foxx as a survivor and a hero because he has survived the, dreaded, nasty disease, COVID-19 vaccine, and is fighting his way back to health. He, oddly enough, is a champion for right-wing fringe types who are believing that the COVID-19 vaccine has some really nasty stuff in it. Now, they backed away from, chips and things like that, like it's mind controlling you, but they still think they're not really sure what's in the dirty shot. So they don't know what exactly is going to come about in the next couple of years, either by not knowing what's in it or by purposely trying to inoculate the world with this weird vaccine so they can control people and kill folks or whatever it is they want to do. There's so many ways to go with this conspiracy. It's just the fact that you can't really button it down because you don't know. And to their point, we don't know the long effects of the vaccine. We don't necessarily know long effects of things, especially since it came down 9 months into the process. We needed it and it helped out a lot of things. But because it came down so fast, you never really know what the side effects are. A lot of people were worried to get the first shots because of those things, and of people in, if you have seen pictures of me, of my complexion, you would understand that people of my complexion have issues with the government saying, take this shot, it'll be good for you, because sometimes they're not so great for us. However, the way that this idea and this story has been championed by those on the other side is a bit suspect, as they always are. But also the way that we really don't know exactly what's going on is also a bit suspect, which is unfortunate. Now, the reality of news, and I know this from being a longtime actual news person, working in newsrooms and people doing actual reporting, is that it's easier to spread a lie than the truth. Why it is, sometimes it's a bit complicated, but it's easy to spread something that will pick up as just curious enough to get your attention, as opposed to something that is just a straight up fact that sounds kind of boring and just dull. So when you tell a lie, essentially you're trying to sell someone on the idea that what you're saying is true, as opposed to something that's supposedly the truth, which is like, this is what happened. I went to the store, I bought some eggs, I came home, I made an omelet. As opposed to, I went to the store, I forgot to buy eggs, but the reason why I forgot was there was this fight that broke out at the store that got my attention, and then I had to come back home just to be safe. There was no fight at the store. You went to the store, you just forgot to get eggs, and you bought candy instead, and now you have to come up with some reason why you didn't come up with eggs. And that lie, pretty much a dumb thing, is easier for someone to carry on with them and tell than it is to say, I forgot the eggs. It's just how these things work. So the more sensational a story is, the more outlandish something is it's why it will spread. It's why people for years, even though before it was, the internet was there for people to share things on their own screens, would always go nuts when they showed that same picture, the same video of the bear falling out of a tree, bouncing on a trampoline, because that was something that was enjoyable, fun, and just sort of outlandish. And you just sort of take in the fact that, somebody was murdered that night, because somebody gets murdered almost every night. And so that story gets lost in translation and just kind of rolls into the next story. But the same bouncing trampoline bear becomes a new news story every time. Or the squirrel on water skis, and that pops up, that catches your attention, and you always go back to great thoughts, and that stays in your head for a while. But the fact that there was a bombing down the street is something that, well, these things happen, and they're always bad, and it's those people doing those things. So the fact that Jamie Foxx's camp is not giving out substantial information hurts the cause. Now, granted, it's Jamie Foxx's life, it's Jamie Foxx's family, and it's Jamie Foxx's business, what you know. So you don't have to know anything. Him being a public figure, as in a celebrity, it needs to be out there what's going on in his life, because that's how he gins up his business. People care about him, so they want him in stuff. If he were a public figure like, a president or something like that, you have to know about these things, because this is the guy that is making decisions for your behalf, more or less, for the safety of your government and the world itself. If Jamie Foxx is a public figure, as in a school teacher or a church member or just the person at the grocery store, sometimes these things matter because they interact with so many people and have so much sway that you may not think about that could cause an issue. That's why we get really creeped out when we hear about the church scandals where there's pedophilia and things like that, because then you get thoughts in your head about every single church and every single church member and every single high-ranking church official and low-ranking official, and just how good, bad, and different they are, and just what sort of weird things can go on behind the pale. That's why stories about the Hillsong Church and their big tragedy in their scandals is such a big thing, even for people who could care less about church. That's why when you hear about a story about a teacher who has inappropriate relations with a student, whether it's something as small as, and not saying as small as, smacking someone for having a cell phone, or something as big as, not saying that it's that, it could be smaller, of inappropriate sexual behavior, you have to wonder about all schools and all situations and all students and all teachers and what goes on there. That's why when we had the COVID-19 issue and the masking thing became a thing, because apparently breathing on each other was going to kill us all, and one person actually had the disease and was spreading it. You don't know how many people that person was breathing on, literally, in the course of a day, a week, and not knowing they had it, or even knowing they had it and not caring going forth. So not knowing the details of something makes it hard to sell to people that there really is nothing wrong, or if there's something that's really bad, why it should be worried about why it's something wrong. It's something I talk about when I have to get information from someone at work on why something isn't working and I have to fix it, and they're really hesitant about talking about what they did wrong. It's a lot easier to simply say, oh, I broke it this way, than to try to work around it, because one, it helps me fix it faster, and two, the idea that I can come up with in my head will be so salaciously big and bold, because I'm looking to fill that gap, that I'm going to find a reason to punish you even worse for what you did. So that is that. But in relations to stories and talking and things like that, it often helps to be honest up front, to give the information you need to give up front so that people can know what they're dealing with and what's going on. When it comes down to privacy, yes, people deserve privacy. When it comes down to not knowing what's going on, there are times where you can say it's none of your business. He'll be better and we'll deal with it. The consequences come into, as I said, public figures. If no one knows what's going on in Jamie Foxx's life, then insurance people may be a little hesitant to put him into work because he may not finish it. People who work around him, whether they're actual actors or whether they're craft service people or whether they're just the barber, hairdresser, folks like that, may be a bit suspect of what's going on because they don't want to get sick or they don't want to be the cause or the reason that people give for getting them sick, and they don't want to be in trouble on that end. And of course, if he's just not healthy, who's going to want to see a Jamie Foxx something where they know he's giving just half effort into it? It goes to that effect as well. Now, let's not focus the full dwelling on Jamie Foxx here, because right now, this is where I stand on this one. Jamie Foxx got ill at a movie set. Jamie Foxx is dealing with a serious illness that was enough to take him off the shelf for a good period of time, and he's rehabbing to better health. Let's let him rehab to better health, and if he doesn't want to share it, that's on him. It's up to me to want to buy a ticket to whatever Jamie Foxx does going forward. It is all on that. In fact, he's got some things coming out recently that have been in the can that I'm really looking forward to already. We'll just see if he comes back to anything new anytime soon. But the larger issue that I was raising in essentially the communications business, in knowing when to tell folks the truth and when to tell folks the half-truth and when to lie flat out, it should be apparently evident from where I'm going here. You should probably never lie flat out because that's where trouble really comes up. The cover-up is usually worse than the actual crime, and it gets really worse the more you try to cover things up. But in telling the full outright truth where you could scare people, and in telling sort of the detailed, the washed, the clean version of things where you want them to get the information but not get freaked out, is an issue. Because often when you don't give the right amount of pieces, you wash out the wrong parts, you don't give the full details of something, you fudge a number here or there, whether on purpose or not, that's where people see the lie or look for the lie to see and try to poke holes into the story. Transparency is always the best approach. Transparency is always the best approach. I say repetition is the best way to get a message through, so transparency is always the best approach. But in the same vein, knowing everything doesn't fix everything. So in the case for Jamie Foxx, it would have been much better for his team, for his folks, his people, to sort of give a standard issue statement from the get-go and not let people do the black Twitter social media rumors that went on. And of course, not let Mike Tyson be an unofficial spokesperson saying, oh yeah, I saw Jamie the other day. He's all right after his stroke. Things like that. You have to be very, very careful about who you give information to and who you let speak for you and who you let speak, even if they speak for you on things like that. The moral to this story, the thought process behind this actual story of the week, is that there are a lot of people out there who are speaking for a lot of people. Yes, there are people who are spokespersons for you in various cases, whether you choose them to or not. I am currently going through an issue where it's pretty big. My city was hit by a massive tornado in the middle of, I will say, the good part of town. And it's just sort of devastating what's going on there just to fix something there. This is not low country someplace, in the middle of nowhere, the trailer park that you get in a standard sort of cliched version of what happens. This is running up the middle street where schools and shopping centers and where people live and thrive are going. And at the moment now, there are various issues between getting the people that live there back up to normal, getting the businesses that people need back up to normal, and the fact that now there's all this land that's been knocked over. Why don't we go out there and buy up Senate land and raise it in developments and raise the costs and get the people out of the way? It's literally an issue of gentrification, except it's not rich white people coming to poor black neighborhoods. It's rich developers coming into a fairly influential neighborhood. But since there's land there, let's put stuff up. The information that we're getting from that right now is pretty sketchy. In fact, most of it's coming from rumors and innuendo and from people hearing things and people listening to things and people just sort of ear to the ground type stuff. Because these aren't the things you really report on the 10 o'clock news. Information is a powerful tool. Knowledge is powerful. Information is powerful. And the two together can make a great knockout punch for anybody. The problem is, whoever has the knowledge has control of the information, and sometimes information that's out there is not backed by actual knowledge that's working on any kind of scale. So for Jamie Foxx, they would be great to put out a very strong worded statement saying this is exactly what happened. This is what we're going through. These are the things we don't know, but we're pretty sure it wasn't just because he got a vaccine, he had a stroke, and go on with that, as opposed to being guarded, although they have the right to be, on every bit of information. Make sure that when you're dealing with information, dealing with things on this level, it's a big deal. You never really know what you don't know. And once you find out, you don't know how it affects the stuff you thought you knew in the past. So be wary of information not getting out very well. Also be wary of information that's getting out a little too well, that's not coming from who you think is the actual source. We are praying for Jamie Foxx's speedy recovery. Sounds like he's doing very much better at this point in time. And we just can't wait to see him come back to do more funny Jamie Foxx stuff soon. In the meantime, give him his space, give him his privacy, let him heal up and coalesce. And if you don't know, if you're not in this circle, you're not in the camp, don't spread. Try that for a while. This has been the story of the week for this week. This week is ending the 17th of June, 2023. The story of the week is a supplemental podcast, which is based on data found from the weekly wrap up, based on data we use every single day for the Things You Might Have Heard podcast. You can find more details on all of these things at our website. This is theconversationproject.com, and we definitely need your help to keep things going. We want you to stop by our feeds on Facebook and Twitter and engage in the stories. That gives us the data for daily podcasting and for the weekly podcast and for this thing right here. We want you to stop by our website and visit our sponsors and our partnerships page, because we need help by you going by our sponsors and maybe partnering up with us so we can continue to do these things here. And the most important thing we need you to do is to be with us. So as I say, as I wrap up basically all of my media, stay hydrated, stay limber, stay on task. The origin of that is because life is a long journey, a long struggle. You need to make sure that you're in the best shape possible to survive, because it's not so much about us. Yes, we need your views, and we need you to listen to our podcast, but it's about you and the people around you that need you. Jamie Foxx's folks need him, so he's going to do what he can to get better. You do what you can to stay good or get better for the people near you. With that, we're going to wrap this thing up for today. What story will we talk about for next week's podcast, Story of the Week podcast? You'll find out by tuning in every single weekday to Things You Might Have Heard to get some idea, and then officially getting the good idea from the weekly wrap-up produced for every Saturday here on the internets. So with that, I'm Jay Cleveland Payne. Thank you so much. Join us next week as we find out what we'll talk about in the Story of the Week.